Forget everything you think you know about Humpty Dumpty being an egg. That's a modern distraction, a clever but misleading answer to a very old riddle. The truth is, we've been misclassifying the rhyme. We think of it as a nursery story, but it's actually a piece of battlefield intel. A coded warning about a catastrophic military failure that has repeated itself for millennia. A pattern of disaster hidden in plain sight. Most people think they've solved this riddle, believing Humpty Dumpty was a famous canon from the English Civil War. But that's only one layer of the truth, the most recent chapter in a much longer, darker story. What if I told you that Cannon was just the latest victim of a 2,000-year-old curse? By the end of this investigation, you won't just know what Humpty Dumpty was, you'll understand the ancient, terrifying war machine he was always destined to be. We all see him in our mind's eye. A fragile, anthropomorphic egg, dressed in little pants and a jacket, perched precariously on a high brick wall. He's clumsy, a bit foolish, and his story is a simple lesson about being careful. A cautionary tale about the irreversible consequences of a single, foolish mistake. His fall is gentle, almost comical. Until we realize he can't be put back together again. This image is so powerful, so deeply ingrained in our culture, that it feels timeless, as if it has always existed. But it hasn't. This version of the character owes its modern popularity almost entirely to Lewis Carroll's 1871 book, Through the Looking Glass. It was there, through the strange and pedantic conversations with Alice, and solidified by Sir John Tenniel's iconic illustration, that the image of the Eggman was cemented into our collective consciousness. We see him on baby clothes, in cartoons, and in picture books. We think we know him. We think we understand his simple, tragic story, but we don't know him at all. The truth is, that image is a lie. It's a comfortable fiction laid over a much grittier, much more violent reality. The original rhyme, first published in a book of melodies in 1797, but certainly circulating in oral tradition long before, never once mentions the word egg. Not a single time. It's a riddle, plain and simple. And for centuries, the answer to that riddle was so obvious to those who heard it that it needed no explanation at all. We only think it's about an egg because we've lost the original context. The modern interpretation is a desperate attempt to solve a puzzle whose key has been lost to time. To find the real answer, we have to do what any good investigator does. We have to leave the nursery and go to the scene of the crime. We have to step onto a bloody battlefield. This is where our investigation truly begins, because the key that unlocks the entire mystery isn't a shattered shell. It's a shattered fortress wall. It's the story of a one-eyed gunner, a besieged English city, and a devastating fall from grace that helped decide the ultimate fate of a king. But what you're about to see is that this story wasn't an origin, but an echo of something far, far older. Our first destination is the summer of 1648. We are in the final brutal years of the English Civil War, a conflict that pitted the royalist forces, loyal to King Charles I, against the parliamentarians, the Roundheads, led by Oliver Cromwell. Our focus is on the town of Colchester in the southeast of England. This was a royalist stronghold, a bastion of loyalty to the crown in a region largely controlled by Parliament. But Colchester wasn't just any city. It was a fortress. It was surrounded by massive ancient walls that towered over the landscape. These weren't medieval constructions. They were much older. They were originally built by the Roman Empire, a lingering testament to a forgotten age of power, repurposed for a new war. These imposing walls made Colchester a potent symbol of royalist defiance. For the attacking parliamentary army, led by the brilliant and ruthless Sir Thomas Fairfax, taking the city was not just a strategic goal. It was a psychological necessity. They had to break this symbol of resistance. And so began a siege that would drag on for 11 brutal, sun-baked weeks, filled with starvation, disease, and the constant thunder of cannon fire. Amidst that chaos, the Royalists placed their faith in a single colossal weapon. The defenders of Colchester, though outnumbered and cut off, had an ace up their sleeve. They possessed a truly massive cannon, one of the largest and most powerful pieces of artillery of its era. This formidable weapon wasn't placed on just any section of the wall. It was mounted high upon the sturdy stone tower of the St. Mary at the Wall Church, which was integrated directly into the city's defensive line. From this superior vantage point, it could rain down hellfire and destruction on the parliamentarian forces below, breaking their formations and shattering their morale. A weapon this important, this central to the city's defense, needed a name, and soldiers, with their characteristic gallows humor, gave it a nickname. They called it Humpty Dumpty. Now, this wasn't a random or nonsensical choice. It was a perfect piece of 17th century slang. At the time, the term Humpty Dumpty was used to describe a short, clumsy, or squat person. It was also, fittingly, the name of a potent alcoholic drink, a type of boiled ale mixed with brandy. The name perfectly captured the weapon's character: squat, powerful, and packing an incredible punch. That subscribe button is the quickest way to fire off your support for this investigation. It was the guardian of Colchester, a seemingly invincible sentinel sitting proudly on its perch, the very embodiment of royalist strength. And for weeks, that strength seemed absolute. But as we'll soon discover with ancient war machines, what makes something powerful is almost always the key to its spectacular destruction. Sir Thomas Fairfax, the parliamentary commander, was a patient and intelligent strategist. He understood that a direct assault against such a powerful weapon was suicide. He didn't need to destroy the cannon itself. He only needed to destroy what was holding it up. Fairfax issued a new order to his artillery crews. They were to ignore the royalist soldiers on the walls, ignore the other cannons, and focus all of their firepower on one single, specific point: the base of the church tower, directly beneath the giant cannon. Day after day, the parliamentarian cannons chipped away at the ancient Roman stone. Then, on the 25th of July, 1648, after a sustained and relentless bombardment, the wall finally gave way. The foundation crumbled. The mighty Humpty Dumpty, the pride of the royalist defense, tipped forward. And with a thunderous crash that echoed across the entire battlefield, it plunged to the ground below. Suddenly, the words of the rhyme are no longer a metaphor. They are a literal, concise, after-action report. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. And what about those final famous lines? All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. It was the absolute truth. A multi-ton cast-iron cannon, either shattered by the impact or sunk deep into the marshy ground at the base of the wall, was impossible for the royalist, the king's, men to repair or remount in the middle of a siege. Their greatest weapon had been neutralized in an instant, not by a direct hit, but by a simple, undeniable law of physics. The rhyme was a coded history, a perfect encapsulation of a specific and catastrophic military disaster. And for many historians and folklorists, this is where the story ends. It's a satisfying, clever, and historically verifiable explanation. The case, it seems, is closed. But if you're like me, a solution that neat, that perfect, doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like a clue. It leaves a crucial and deeply unsettling question unanswered. Why this cannon? Hundreds, if not thousands, of weapons were destroyed in that long, bloody war. Sieges and battles saw countless pieces of artillery fall from walls or be shattered by enemy fire. So why did this specific event, the fall of one cannon in Colchester, get immortalized in a rhyme that would be told to children for centuries, long after the English Civil War and King Charles I were forgotten by most of the world? What if the story of the Colchester cannon wasn't an origin story at all? What if it was just an echo? What if the rhyme was already ancient, a piece of deep folk memory that the soldiers simply applied to their cannon, because its fate fit a much older, much more primordial pattern? Does that feel closer to the truth to you? That is the real secret we are hunting for. Humpty Dumpty didn't fall for the first time in 1648. That was just the last time he was seen. His real story, his true origin, began 2,000 years ago on the very same patch of land. Before we can find the true original Humpty Dumpty, we have to stop thinking of him as a person, an egg, or even a single cannon. Humpty Dumpty is something much more fundamental. He is an archetype. He is the physical embodiment of the slow, invincible force. Think about the core elements of the story. You have a massive, heavily armored object, almost impervious to direct attack. It is designed for one of two purposes: to sit on top of a wall to defend it, or to be brought to a wall to break it down. Its entire existence is defined by its relationship to the wall. Its immense strength, its incredible weight and power, is also its one single fatal flaw. It is so heavy, so powerful, that once its structural integrity is compromised, once it has its great fall, its power instantly becomes zero. It is so specialized and so cumbersome that it cannot be fixed or remounted in the heat of battle. The resources and time required are simply too great. This description fits the Colchester cannon perfectly, of course. But it also describes a much older, much more ancient category of weapon, a type of war machine that would have been a terrifying and unforgettable sight to the ancient inhabitants of Britain. He is the siege engine. So now we must dig deeper, back through the soil of history. Let's return to Colchester, but let's wind the clock back much, much further. We are standing on the very same spot, not in 1648, but in the year 43 AD. We are watching the legions of the Roman Emperor Claudius conquer the Celtic tribes and establish one of the first major Roman cities in Britain, Camulodunum, the city that would one day be called Colchester. The very walls that the Royalists would later defend were originally Roman. For the next 400 years, Roman engineering, Roman military power, and Roman culture dominated the island. When the legions finally withdrew in the 5th century, they didn't take their architecture with them. They left behind their roads, their villas, their fortresses, and their walls. For the next 1,000 years, the people of Britain lived amongst the ruins of this fallen empire. They farmed in the shadow of Roman aqueducts and built their new churches with recycled Roman stone. The memory of Roman power was literally etched into the soil beneath their feet. And with that memory, passed down through generations, came the stories of how those great walls were both built and broken. The collective folk memory of a land holds on to the ghosts of its most dramatic and traumatic events. And for the ancient Britons, few events could have been more dramatic or more terrifying than the sight of a full Roman legion laying siege to one of their hill forts. This is the linchpin of our entire investigation. This is the clue that connects the 17th century canon to the ancient world. I want you to imagine a Roman battering ram. This wasn't just a giant log carried by a few men. We're talking about a massive, sophisticated weapon, the size of a small house, housed inside a huge wheeled shed. This shed, called a vinea, was covered with thick, wet animal hides to protect it from flaming arrows and rocks. It moves slowly, inexorably, towards a city wall, a terrifying, unstoppable monster. The soldiers operating the ram are protected deep inside its shell. To the defenders looking down from the wall, it would look like a single monstrous creature, a giant squat beast crawling towards them. Now, picture the most famous Roman military innovation of all, the testudo formation, the Latin word for tortoise. Dozens of highly trained legionaries lock their giant, curved shields over their heads and at their sides, creating a single, impenetrable shell of armor. Under this moving fortress, they could advance right up to the base of a wall, completely protected from enemy arrows. It is a slow, squat, rounded, unstoppable force. It is, in both its form and its function, a Humpty Dumpty. And just like the cannon that would replace it centuries later, its greatest strength was also its greatest weakness. While arrows and spears would bounce harmlessly off its surface, it was incredibly vulnerable to a sudden collapse of the ground beneath it, like a hidden camouflaged pit dug by the defenders. A catastrophic fire attack using boiling oil could break the formation in seconds. If the tortoise was broken, if its structure was compromised, it couldn't be reformed while under attack. All the emperor's men couldn't put the tortoise back together again. Can you see how the ghost of this idea might have haunted the landscape for centuries? This is the 2,000-year-old secret. The rhyme is the preserved folk memory, the battlefield wisdom, describing the catastrophic failure of these ancient Roman siege engines. So, you see, the rhyme wasn't invented in 1648 by a group of royalist soldiers. Instead, you could say it was activated. It was a dormant piece of cultural software that was suddenly run again when the right conditions were met. For over 1,000 years, from the fall of Rome to the rise of Cromwell, the story of the unstoppable thing that has a great, irreversible fall was passed down through generations. It likely changed its form many times, attaching itself to different legends and local histories, but its core lesson remained the same. It was a piece of military wisdom, a warning about the danger of over-reliance on a single, powerful, but ultimately vulnerable weapon. It was a reminder that the strongest fortress can be brought down not by brute force, but by attacking its foundation. When the royalist soldiers in Colchester watched their own squat, powerful, wall-sitting weapon suffer the exact same fate, a catastrophic fall caused by a structural failure from below, they didn't invent a new story to describe it. They reached for the old one. They applied the ancient archetypal name of Humpty Dumpty to their canon, because it was playing out a script that had been written on that very landscape by the Roman legions centuries before. The canon didn't create the legend. In a way, the legend claimed the canon. It was the perfect modern example of an ancient, timeless truth. This connection is the final piece of the puzzle, and it changes everything. So, this rhyme is far more than a silly story about a clumsy egg. It's deeper than just a clever historical record of one canon's demise. At its core, Humpty Dumpty is a timeless and profound parable about the fundamental fragility of power. It is an ancient warning that any entity, no matter how heavily armored, how intimidating, or how seemingly invincible, is dangerously and fatally vulnerable if its foundation is compromised. That foundation can be a literal wall of stone, but it can also be public trust, economic stability, or a flawed ideology. The archetype applies to everything. Think of a too-big-to-fail corporation that collapses overnight because of a hidden flaw in its accounting. Think of a rigid political ideology that shatters the moment its core premises are proven false. The fall is always sudden, it is always total, and it is always irreversible. How many modern Humpty Dumptys can you think of sitting on their own walls right now? All the king's men can never put it back together again. The reason isn't a lack of effort. It's because the very structure of its power, the foundation upon which it sat, has been obliterated. The rhyme is a 2,000-year-old piece of wisdom that reminds us to never mistake height for safety and to always, always check our foundations. This concept of a hidden ancient identity concealed within a simple children's story is a powerful key, and it unlocks an even older mystery. What if the glass slipper was never made of glass, and Cinderella wasn't a servant girl, but a Greco-Egyptian noble from a 2,600-year-old true story? Click here to uncover her real identity.